12 men climbed into their cockpits that morning, knowing that if anything went wrong, if a single radio call leaked, if one missile missed, if one pilot ejected over the wrong side of the border, they could start World War III. July 30th, 1970. 1400 hours local time.
Copy that. Ready for
The
engine
Sinai
start.
desert below is a furnace. Heat shimmer turns the horizon into liquid. At 30,000 feet, the air is thin and cold, but inside the cockpit of an Israeli F-4 Phantom, sweat soaks through the flight suit before the wheels even leave the runway. This is the war of attrition, a conflict with no front lines, no declarations, no end in sight. For 2 years, Egypt and Israel have been bleeding each other slowly. Artillery barrages, commando raids, daily dogfights over the Suez Canal, thousands dead, and neither side winning. But something has changed in the last 6 months, something that rewrites every rule of engagement. The Soviet Union has arrived. Not advisors, not weapon shipments, pilots, real ones. Flying MiG-21s painted in Egyptian Air Force colors, with Egyptian markings, but with Russian hands on the stick and Russian voices in the radio. Moscow has decided that Egypt cannot lose this war, and so they have quietly inserted their best aviators, veterans, instructors, men who have studied Israeli tactics for years, into the fight. The problem is, Israel knows. Israeli intelligence has been tracking the Soviet pilots for months. They are good, exceptionally good. Their formation discipline is tighter than anything the Egyptians have shown before. Their reaction times are faster. Their radio procedures are textbook precise, except that the textbook is written in Russian. In June, Soviet-piloted MiGs cross into Israeli-held airspace and engage Israeli Phantoms. The Israelis disengage. Orders from above: do not escalate. Do not shoot down Soviet aircraft. But the engagements keep happening. The Soviets grow bolder. They start escorting Egyptian strike packages. They start pushing deeper. And Israeli pilots, who have never lost a war, who have never lost a major air battle, are being told to turn away. At Air Force headquarters in Tel Aviv, the mood is grim. If the Soviets establish air superiority over the Canal Zone, Israel's ground forces are naked. Without air cover, tanks burn. Without air cover, cities can be hit. Without air cover, the 1967 war, the miracle, the legend, can be reversed in weeks. General Mati Had, commander of the Israeli Air Force, takes the problem to the top, to Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, to Prime Minister Golda Meir herself. The answer comes back: find a way. The plan that emerges is elegant in the way that only truly dangerous ideas can be elegant. It is called Operation Rimon 20. Rimon, the Hebrew word for pomegranate. And like a pomegranate, it looks harmless until it explodes. The concept is built on one simple insight. The Soviets are aggressive because they feel safe. They believe they can identify Israeli aircraft early, engage on their terms, and disengage before taking serious losses. They trust their radar picture. So give them a radar picture they want to see. Here is the trap. A pair of Israeli Mirages, fast, nimble, but flying in an unusually tight formation, will cross into the combat zone. On radar, 2 aircraft flying wingtip to wingtip at reduced speed produce a single, slow, fat return. The signature of a reconnaissance aircraft. Slow, unarmed, vulnerable. The bait. When the Soviet-piloted MiGs scramble to intercept what they think is an easy kill, They will climb into a sky that is already full of Israeli Phantoms, F-4s, armed to the teeth, flying low and fast, and completely off the Soviet radar picture, waiting. The moment the MiGs commit, the moment they drop their noses toward the fake reconnaissance plane and push their throttles forward, the trap closes. The Phantoms come up from below. The Mirages split and go vertical. And 12 Soviet-trained pilots suddenly realize they are not the hunters. They are the prey. 3 days before the operation, the ground crews know something big is coming. At the Israeli air base, technicians work through the night. F-4 Phantoms are pulled from the line and gone over bolt by bolt. Sidewinder missiles, the AIM-9D variant, heat-seeking, reliable at close range, are checked, calibrated, and hung on the rails. Radar systems are tested and tested again. Electronic warfare pods are verified. Fuel loads are calculated to the kilogram. The pilots are briefed in a sealed room. No notes leave the building. The rules of engagement are clear and terrifying in equal measure. You may fire, but you must not let any of this become public. If a pilot goes down over Egyptian territory, the mission parameters go with him. If a Soviet pilot ejects, his aircraft must be destroyed before anyone reaches it. The objective is not just to win a dogfight. The objective is to tell Moscow, without a single public word, that the skies over Israel are closed, even to them. July 30th, 1412. The Mirages cross the canal. They are flying at 20,000 feet, tight formation, throttles pulled back. On the Egyptian radar screens and on the Soviet radar screens feeding data to the MiG Alert Squadron, the return is exactly what the planners hoped for. One aircraft, slow, alone. At the Soviet-operated base, the scramble order goes out. 4 MiG-21s, Soviet pilots, Soviet training, Egyptian paint, rotate off the runway in pairs and climb hard toward the intercept. Their GCI controller is feeding them vectors. Clean picture, easy geometry. The target is not maneuvering. It is not jamming. It is just flying, slow and fat, right into their weapons envelope. Contact, the lead pilot calls. Below and behind him, at 8,000 feet, 4 Israeli F-4 Phantoms light their afterburners simultaneously. The noise is biblical. Each Phantom accelerates through Mach 1 in seconds, climbing at an angle that presses the pilots into their seats with 4 times their body weight. The radar intercept officers in the back seats are scanning, sorting, locking. Not speaking unless they have to. Everyone knows their job. At 14:16, the lead MiG pilot sees the Mirages split. That is when he knows. The next 4 minutes are controlled chaos. The MiGs break formation immediately, Soviet doctrine, trained response to an ambush, and go to full afterburner, pulling hard turns to create separation. But the Phantoms are already inside their decision cycle. The geometry is already wrong for the MiGs, and the Israelis know it. Fox 2. The first Sidewinder comes off the rail. It tracks the heat bloom of a MiG-21 engine, and the missile does not miss. The aircraft comes apart in a fast orange flash, splash one. The radio discipline of the Israeli pilots is cold and precise. No celebration, no noise, just information. The surviving MiGs are pulling 9G turns now, the kind of maneuver that grays your vision at the edges and turns your arms to lead. At 9G, a 90-kilogram pilot weighs over 800 kilograms. The aircraft groans. Hydraulic pressure fluctuates. The stick fights back. An Israeli Phantom takes a hit. Soviet cannon fire, short burst, 2 rounds through the rear fuselage. The hydraulic warning light comes on. The pilot calls it out. His wingman slides into position, and they begin working toward the canal, away from the fight. But they do not leave. Not yet. Fox 2, second missile, second kill. The Mirages have rejoined and are now engaging at close range, knife fight distance, inside missile parameters, guns, and raw energy maneuvers. One Soviet pilot pulls an almost impossible reversal, nearly gets a firing solution on a Mirage, and then loses sight in the sun. In 4 minutes and 30 seconds, it is over. 5 MiG-21s are destroyed. Soviet pilots, not Egyptian pilots, Soviet pilots, are dead or in the desert. One ejects. His parachute is tracked by Israeli aircraft circling above him. They do not transmit his location. He lands in the desert, in Egyptian-controlled territory, and is recovered by Egyptian forces within the hour. He is flown to Moscow within 48 hours, debriefed, and his existence in this theater is never officially acknowledged. The 2 Soviet pilots confirmed killed are buried quietly. No state funeral. No mention in Pravda. Their families are told what families of covert operators are always told: an accident, during training, at home. The damaged Israeli Phantom lands with hydraulic fluid streaming from its tail. The ground crew counts 2 cannon holes in the rear section, each one large enough to put a fist through. The pilot climbs out and sits on the wing and does not speak for a long time. Back at the intelligence center, the recordings of the Soviet radio traffic are being analyzed. Russian language calls, Soviet call signs, Soviet procedures, the proof that this was never just Egypt's war. The recordings are classified at the highest level. They will stay there for 20 years. In the hours after the battle, the senior command in Tel Aviv waits. Will Moscow respond? Will there be a diplomatic explosion, an accusation, an ultimatum, a direct confrontation? Golda Meir is briefed. The American embassy is not briefed. Washington does not know this happened. If they did, the pressure to stand down would be immediate and overwhelming. But Moscow says nothing, because Moscow cannot say anything without admitting their pilots were there. The silence from the Kremlin is the loudest possible confirmation that the message was received. The Soviet Air Force does not fly combat missions over the Canal Zone again. Not like this. Not with their own men hunting Israeli aircraft. The war of attrition ends 6 weeks later, in August 1970, with a ceasefire. Historians will debate the causes for decades, but the Israeli pilots who flew that afternoon know what happened. They know that somewhere in the calculation that led to that ceasefire is a desert sky full of smoke, 5 falling MiGs, and a silence from Moscow that said everything. The pilots are debriefed and told to forget. There are no medal ceremonies, no press releases, no names in the papers. The operation is classified, and the classification holds. For years, the men who flew Rimon 20 live with a secret that they cannot share with their wives, their children, or their closest friends. Slowly, carefully, pieces begin to emerge. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapses, Russian veterans begin to speak. Israeli veterans begin to speak. The shape of that afternoon begins to come clear. Avihu Ben Nun, one of the pilots who flew that day, will later become commander of the Israeli Air Force. He will reshape Israeli air doctrine around the lessons of Rimon 20, that surprise, geometry, and information control can defeat a numerically and technically competitive enemy if the trap is set correctly. The tactics developed for that operation, the fake reconnaissance decoy, the low-altitude ambush, the strict radio discipline, will be studied, modified, and applied in conflicts around the world for the next 50 years. The Soviet pilots who died that day were professionals. They were skilled men doing what their country asked of them, far from home, under a false flag in someone else's war. That deserves to be acknowledged. War does not always let you choose your enemy, but sometimes, for a few minutes in a white-hot desert sky, it lets you understand them completely. 30 miles, 4.5 minutes, 5 aircraft destroyed, and a world war that did not happen. That is the story of Operation Rimon 20.